Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of the Please Let Us Into Med School podcast. I'm Edward.
I'm Anne.
I'm Amel.
I'm Heshan.
Cool. So today we're going to be doing UCAT, BMAT, and interview styles in different universities. So what do you guys want to start with?
I think UCAT is a good start because we all do it.
UCAT? Okay, cool. Okay, so UCAT stands for University Clinical Aptitude Test, and it's taken by most med school students, or pretty much every med school apart from the ones that do BMAT, which we'll get onto later. And it's scored out of 9. There's 5 different sections, 4 of which are scored from 300 to 900. And the last one, called SJT, or Situational Judgment Test, is scored from Band 1 to Band 4. Band 1 being really good, and Band 4 being not so good.
So a little breakdown of each of the sections. So the first section is verbal reasoning, which essentially tests your comprehension skills. You'll be given true or false questions and just general questions from a passage. The second section is decision making, which is probably the broadest one. It ranges from drawing conclusions to looking at probabilities and stuff. And then the next is quantitative reasoning, which is essentially just your maths type questions. And the fourth section is abstract reasoning, which you have to look at shapes and patterns and stuff. And all of these are multiple choice. And as Edward said, they're marked from 300 to 900. And then situational judgment is testing your understanding of medicine in general, to be honest, and like medical ethics and stuff like that, which is why it's banded slightly differently.
So have a look. In 2020, the average score on the UCAT was 628. And the way they calculate that number is they add up all your scores and then divide it by 4. And it basically gets like an average of how you did in all of the tests.
In dentistry, none of the unis do the BMAT test. So all you have to do is the UCAT. All of the unis expect it. So you'd have to do pretty good in that. And of course, start practicing early. With the UCAT, with the situational judgment is quite important because a lot of the unis, they don't care if you do especially good in the maths part or the others or the decision making because you get like an overall score. But with the situational judgment, you need with most unis like a minimum band 3 because that is the most important thing with being a doctor. To do with the ethics is about how you behave, how you interact with patients and colleagues and things like that. They're really important.
So preferably a band 2 is you want to have a band 2. Band 3 is okay, but you don't really want it. Band 2 and above are what you want to get. And it just, I think, it differs from the other sections, as I think that's like the most vital to becoming a doctor. If you do well in this, they know that you can be a doctor. You have a good understanding of ethics, what to do and when to do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And an important thing about the UCAT is it's very time pressured. So everyone always says do a lot of questions and do them early. So some good resources for that are Medify, the Medic portal, and the UCAT website itself, where you can get tons of questions.
So most of the time with UCAT, it's either, so you're ranked by the university and then they select the people at the top, or similarly it's to do with like percentiles and things like that. So 99% of the time you're going to be ranked against everyone else instead of just a single cutoff score that's the same as every year. The cutoff score is always different depending on each year. Yeah, I was going to say.
So universities grade you different. So I think, so some obviously UCAT is very important. So if you have a good UCAT score, you should apply to that universities. Others, it's not so important. So if you don't do as well, you can like rely on more your grades.
I'll have a look here. With a high UCAT score, the ones that it's talking about are Nottingham, Bristol, Edinburgh, and King's College. Those are the ones that they talk about. You need a really high UCAT score to get into, or if you do have a high UCAT score, it'll really help you get into those. Or if you have a lower one, it's Cardiff, Kiel, Plymouth, Sunderland, and Liverpool are all ones that would prefer lower UCAT score. Not prefer it, but it's not as important, for example, with your predicted grades or maybe personal statement interviews, things like that.
Yeah, I know for Edinburgh it's pretty high. So I think it's above 700, which is really high.
That is really high, yeah.
But then they don't require it to. They basically grade. They pick people on like a 100% basis. So your actual grades count as a bit. Your UCAS, because your personal statement, I think, counts as a bit. Actually, no. Not personal statement, but your situational judgment counts as a small bit about how they grade you. So, yeah.
So there's also the BMAT, which is another admissions test. If you're not doing the UCAT, you have to do the BMAT. And there are only 7 universities which require you to do the BMAT. And those are Brighton and Sussex, Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Imperial, Lancaster, and Leeds. So if you want to go to any of those, you have to do the BMAT rather than the UCAT. And the BMAT is a little different from the UCAT. One, it has a written component of it. So the BMAT has 3 sections. Section 1 and 2 are both multiple choice, but section 3 requires you to write an essay in 30 minutes. So some people say that the BMAT is slightly harder than the UCAT because of the written element.
BMAT, they test you on, is it like the level is GCSE sciences and maths, I think? You have to know.
Yeah.
And also, there's a written element
Just
as well.
between A level. I think, so for further maths for A level, sort of that level.
Oh, okay.
For all of the subjects, so it's in between. Sort of like the high level, level A answers in GCSE.
So section 1 is more of like problem solving. So it's similar to decision making in the UCAT, where you have to like draw conclusions and stuff. And section 2 is where you have your like high GCSE level biology, chemistry, maths, and physics type questions.
And then on there's different options for the essay section. There's different options on what type of essay you want to do. Is that right? I don't know what the types of essays are.
So they usually give you 3 like statements, sort of, and you choose one of the statements to write an essay on. And they tend to be, the first one is quite like abstract, completely like open-ended. The second one is more science-based, and the third is more medicine-based. And you basically have 30 minutes to make an essay based on the statement and the question they give you. And an important thing to consider when you're writing your BMAT essays, you have to be really, really concise, because you're basically only given like 1 page of A4 in order to write this essay. And a lot of the questions are really open-ended, so you really need to know what you're writing before you start writing.
Get to the point, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to do like types of interviews as well? I can talk about that for a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So if you do well in your UCAT and BMAT, and then you get decent like predicted grades and things like that, we get invited to an interview for different universities, and there's 2 types of those. So you've got panel interviews, which are a bit more traditional, and MMIs, which are becoming a lot more popular now. MMI stands for multi-milli interview. So panel interviews, let me have a look. Panel interviews have 1 to 4 panelists per person, and they can be a mixture of different people. So they can be actual medical professionals or people from the university, or they can be members of the public as well, to provide an outside look on it. So there's quite a wide range of questions as well. So they can sometimes just look at your like CV and different past experiences and that and ask you about that. Or they can be very set sort of stereotypical interview questions, like, what's your biggest weakness and that kind of thing.
I think with panel interviews, it's important that you really know your personal statement well, because they will look at your personal statement, so you need to know what you're talking about before you go in.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be caught off guard.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emma?
I think it's also a good idea to have an understanding of NHS hot topics at the given time. So I think those come up quite often. So before the interview, personal statement well, know hot topics, and be confident. And in my case, because I don't do biology, I need to have a basic understanding of biology A level. So
yeah, I think from what I was reading as well, you have to be very like self-aware. You need to know what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, and you need to be able to identify very quickly where you've learned lessons in the past. Because they'll ask you things like, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from, I don't know, doing your A-levels or working at this and that place or things like that. So you need to be very self-aware of what you've learned.
And like Amal said, you also need to have quite a decent understanding of how the NHS works and everything, and
definitely
what being a doctor means, because they might ask you something like, what do you think are the pros and cons of being a doctor? So you need to be aware that it's not all just good, because obviously like helping people and everything, it's so great, right? But you need to be aware that there are also like huge time like commitments and stuff that you have to make, and aware that it's not all positive, there are negatives to the job.
There's got to be,
And I think for some of the questions they could ask you, so you need to know about both sides of the argument, and you can't just be one-sided. So you want to argue both sides, sort of topic. So, for example, should everyone be vaccinated? Should be made legal for everyone to be vaccinated? I need to argue both sides of the argument.
Yeah. I think coming off that, I think if I was going to answer that, I'd probably go down the route of talking about medical ethics, things like that. You know, the pillars of medical ethics. Knowing about how a medical professional would approach a situation has got to be super, super important in the panel interviews, because they're going to ask you, like, you know, quite in-depth questions, and you've got to know it off by heart, definitely.
The interview styles for dentistry are pretty much the same. You have your like traditional panel interviews, and you also have your MMIs. Just like you've explained, but probably they might have a bit more of a dental like influence in them. I'd say definitely go into them knowing your medical ethics, or that have like a decent understanding of how dentistry works in the UK with the NHS and the private sector.
Yeah.
And also, this isn't important, but you can like start learning some dentistry, because a lot of you don't really learn in your normal biology lessons or whatever. So like you can learn about mineralization, cavity formation, that kind of stuff. So if you do happen to come across something like that, you will have somewhat of an idea of how to tackle it.
Yeah, and it'll definitely impress the interviewer if you know even just about the basics of the things. Being able to talk about that and you know, sound like you know about it is definitely going to put you ahead of the other candidates, I think. The other style of interviews is MMIs, or multi-mini interviews. So that's when there's normally 7 or 8, or I've heard it can go up to 10 different stations of really short little interviews where they'll ask you maybe just one. Each person asks you one question which you have to answer. So it says stations can range from discussing personal statements and experience to more practical scenarios that involve candidates interacting with an actor who will be playing a role. So I think what you learn from your work experience is going to be really important for this as well, and being able to take away those lessons and apply them to the situations in real life and what you might face as a medical professional.
And also specifically like in role play types interviews that you might get, it's really important that you show like empathy, because in a lot of cases they might ask you, how would you deliver this piece of bad news? So you need to be able to communicate well and, you know, show empathy.
Yeah, take it seriously. Don't think it's a joke.
Yeah.
'Cause all the scenarios they give you might not necessarily be in a medical setting, but it'll still be relevant. So even if it's not directly linked to something you'd see, for example, in a hospital, don't be thrown off by that.
I think some universities do traditional and some universities do MMI. And I think with MMI, you have a different interviewer for each of the many stations. Yeah. So that means if you don't bond with one interview, you've still got like some others which you can like bond with, and that could help you in the interview process. So that's good to keep in mind.
What I was reading about, because I was looking at a few different like sort of example questions of MMIs, and it's quite similar to the situational judgment part of the UCAT. Like a lot of them are quite ethics based, or what would you do in this situation? And what I was reading was there isn't really a right or wrong. Obviously, there is sort of a right or wrong answer, but it's more about how well you sort of argue a point, and you have to be able to, as Amal was saying earlier, evaluate both sides and go, well, these are the pros and cons of each situation. Should we do some example questions? Shall I ask an example question? We'll see what you guys think of it. We'll just discuss it, not like
yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so example question 1. Here we go. A close friend of yours is in their first year of medical school with you, and tells you that her parent was recently diagnosed with a terminal illness. She feels overwhelmed with her studies and is considering dropping out of medical school to spend more time with her family. How would you address the situation? So straight away, it's like a very serious topic, quite hard-hitting. So how would you think you'd answer that?
I would comfort them and then tell them there has to be some sort of advisor at a university that would tell them, because like maybe they could benefit from like missing a year and coming back or something, just to like grieve, like get past this and then come back ready to study.
Yeah.
But like definitely not leave the whole medical course, because they've obviously worked very hard for that.
Yeah.
But if they need time for themselves, then they do deserve that, don't they?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think many universities do have a dedicated mental health team for the medical profession. And I think if that does happen, I think she should have maybe contacted them first, see their advice, see what arrangements they can make. But
Yeah.
as Hoshin said, I don't think she should leave med school. It's like that's part of her future, something she's worked really hard for. And if she leaves, then she may regret in the future. So as a friend, you need to obviously be comforting, be nice about it, and just listen to her. I mean, that's the most important thing.
Let me see if I can find the example answer. Here we go. Okay, so what you have to do is you're not supposed to. It says, like, try not to take a side with it. Don't just say, "Oh, you should leave med school. You shouldn't leave med school." It says you should evaluate the pros and cons with the other person, but in the end, you have to support them for whatever they want. So if they want to leave med school, you have to support them with it because they're your friend. Yeah, that's what they've said basically. We do another one. I'll find one. Let me find another one. I'll find a nice one than that.
Yeah.
Intense off the bat.
Yeah, that was really intense. They're all so horrible. Here we go. Okay, here you go. So you're working in on a group project with 3 other students. The 3 of you have put in tremendous amount of work in order to have the project done by its due date next week. However, you've noticed that the 4th member of the group has been reluctant to commit to the project and seems to be free riding off the contributions of the other members of the group. All members will receive the same grade for the project, despite the extent of contribution of each member. How would you address the situation?
So I think first off, it's important to talk to the 4th member, see what's going on in their head, find out why they might not be putting in as much as effort as everyone else. If you can get them to cooperate more, then great. But it's also important that you don't start like letting that affect your own work, because at the end of the day, you are still being graded on it. So you need to make sure that you still put in as much effort as you can.
Yeah. So you're right. Yeah, you have to go basically talk to them in a non-judgmental, confrontational manner. Try not to get angry, and just try and find out what kind of reason or anything, if you can help with anything. After talking to them, then you should report back to the remaining group members in order to facilitate clear lines of communication. So that's, I guess, representing what you should do in a hospital, in a clinical situation, or making sure that everyone's always communicating and no one doesn't know something that everyone should know.
Could you, what does patient confidentiality mean? And when would it be appropriate to breach this?
It's basically, if someone's going through an illness or having an illness, you can't just tell everyone, or even other doctors really, or who aren't involved anyway. I think the only time you can tell someone, isn't it like, I know there's like a set of rules for it. I can't remember what they are now. I haven't learned that. Yeah, I haven't gone through medical ethics that much yet. Do you guys know?
No.
So I think basically it's when the patient poses a significant risk to the health of themselves or others.
Right.
That's when it's appropriate to but only then you have to speak to appropriate people. You can't just spread around, obviously. I think that's just common sense. You have to speak to people that are responsible for those areas, and only bring those people in if necessary.
Yeah.
I think if maybe you're getting an outside opinion for your patient, I think obviously that's more of a complicated one. I think it depends on what your patient feels okay with.
Yeah.
But I think if you do, maybe keep your patient's name and details maybe a little bit confidential. Only give them the information that they need to know.
Yeah, I think all these questions are quite similar to the SJT ones, except they're a bit more open-ended. Like, you have to formulate your own answer instead of it having like a multiple choice. In SJT, it's just like very inappropriate, that kind of thing. But this is more what you do personally in the situation.
Yeah. So
I
have this book. It's called Medical School Interviews. And it basically breaks down both interview styles, so traditional and MMIs, and it has some example questions.
Yeah.
So I'll find one of those.
Right, Hoshin, let's do this.
Let's go.
I'm ready. Do you want to take a juice break?
Yeah.
Juice break.
Okay, cool. Juice break.
Cool.
We'll be back at like 44. Go.
Run. Medical ethic teeth.
I
Animals
mean,
back.
lemonade is fruit juice.
Oh my god. Well, it's a point. Eyes. There's a hot dog. Cheese break, top of text. Okay, we have our books. Let's
Yeah.
questions.
Let's go.
Wait, Cookie.
Okay. Cookie has been ingested. Question time.
Okay. So a good example of a question they might ask in a panel interview is, what is your main weakness? And this doesn't necessarily apply to just medicine, but
Mhm.
how would you go about answering what is your main weakness?
Whatever you do, don't say that you're a perfectionist, because everyone says that, and it's a
Yeah.
lie. So don't say that, because they'll immediately catch you out. And I've done that before.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and a perfectionist, it might not necessarily be a bad answer, but you just have to word it correctly. If you just straight up say the words, I'm a perfectionist, you won't really get anywhere.
So yeah, I think it's also important to be true to yourself. Like, don't take like the usual answer. I think so. Yeah, but say in a way that maybe when you know you're bad at something, say how maybe I could solve it in a sense, or how could I can easily improve in it.
Yeah, evaluation is really
don't
important.
lie.
Yeah, don't lie.
Yeah, that's
Don't lie
really
in
important.
interviews. That is really important. But yeah, I think evaluating is a really important skill in like medicine. Just like being able to look back and see where you've gone wrong and how you can improve from that, and constantly improving yourself. It's something that they look for anyway, or from the questions that I've seen, things like that. They want you to be very self-aware and know what you need to work on, so then you can work on it and fix it.
What are the pros and cons of being a doctor? So what do you guys think the pros and cons are?
Well, there's quite a lot of pros.
Yeah,
just like, you know, be able to. I love like meeting new people and talking to people all the time. So that would definitely be a huge pro for me personally. Just like being able to meet a ton of people all the time and just talking to them about their own like daily lives. But the cons is definitely like, I mean, it's quite well known that doctors are just, you know, it's 24 hours like on call anytime. You know, you got to wake up at 3 a.m., get dressed, and sprint to, you know, the hospital. Like it's a very demanding job, both physically and mentally, I think. So you've got to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
What do you think for a dentist position? What do you think if you were going to look at the pros and cons of dentistry? How would you do it?
I'd say definitely the social side as well, because dentist is very social, and you interact with a lot of people from different age groups, and I like it because it's not always someone with an ailment. It can be just like a normal checkup. It's quite it's like lighter hearted than medicine, like normal
Yeah.
doctors. And it is also a challenge. Like dentistry, you are also a doctor. It is a challenge. It is hard, but I like a challenge.
Yeah, it's good. How about you, Emma? Pros and cons. What do you think is the biggest pros and cons for you, medicine-wise?
I think cons is obviously social life. Obviously, if you have a family, it will take a huge strain on like relationships and stuff. You also the mental strain, obviously. So like you're putting yourself into a job that's great, but also if maybe something goes wrong, horribly wrong, that could affect your like mental well-being.
Yeah.
You just need to make sure that although you don't take it to heart, you don't lose your sorry. So although obviously something horrible could happen, and like that could affect you, but yeah, that probably be like the worst thing to happen if you were a doctor. Obviously, it does happen. So
yeah, and I think work-life balance is really important as well. Like making sure, like, because I know a lot of the times they ask you about your hobbies and things like that, and that's because they want to know how you're gonna like really stress, you know, because it's a very stressful job at the end of the day, and you've got to be able to do things. And if you just bury yourself in your work, that's not going to work with medicine at all. You've got to be able to do other things and keep yourself busy, without just spending all your time in the hospital.
Yeah. But pros, I mean, pretty straightforward. But pros, obviously, helping people, really.
Yeah.
You know? It's just, I don't think you get the same sort of satisfaction in the way you help and like provide for the community as you do for maybe any other job
Definitely,
within
yeah.
the medical profession. And yeah, it also poses a challenge. Obviously, new interesting innovations. If you're very scientific and like have an interest in science, that's
Yeah.
really good. So yeah,
It's constantly evolving, isn't it? Getting
Yeah.
better and better.
Adding on to that, like what I really like is the fact that because it's constantly evolving, you're constantly like learning new things, and you get to like apply that new knowledge and everything like essentially throughout your life, which I think is really like unique, and I quite
Yeah. Like even as the highest ranking consultant, you're always going to keep learning new things and different procedures, things like that. So that's definitely a huge benefit, which might not be the same in a lot of other jobs. Wait, there's 4 pillars of medical ethics, right?
yeah.
And there are 4 people on the podcast.
What?
So
Oh, we could each do a pillar.
I didn't think of that, but that's a really good idea. No, yeah, we should do that. Wow, yeah. So do you want to each do a different pillar then? Cool. So thank you for watching episode 3. Next week we're going to be doing medical ethics and the 4 pillars. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Way push them. Yeah.